So we're going to get straight into it today, and this is a gripe. It's a rant. It's a message. It's everything rolled into one. But the first place it starts with is the absolute absence, lack of, insufficient ability to reason critically. People don't think critically anymore. They are, I'm speaking in broad generalities here, but we're just sheep. And we hear somebody's voice and we go to that voice. And some of the most bizarre things that are happening, because particularly in times like this when America's at conflict, you hear a lot of stuff. And sides start choosing, but they don't even really know the points behind their stance. So I want to start with the Pope. Just recently visited the third largest mosque in the world. It's in Algiers. This is according to the Vatican News. After removing his shoes to enter as required by protocol, he remained inside for just under 10 minutes, several of which were spent in, quote, silent reflection beside the Imam and before the mihrab, the niche that is carved into the wall that indicates the direction of Mecca. It's towards this direction that Muslims orient themselves during prayer. According to Islamic tradition, that little niche symbolizes the presence of God and the centrality of prayer. As reported by the Vatican, the Pope then withdrew for a private moment of dialogue with the rector of the mosque, where he expressed, quote, gratitude for being in a place that represents the space proper to God. Well, what would Paul say? Would he actually, I understand respecting another religion because, my gosh, that's what's got us into anti-Semitism, right? But to make a statement that it represents the space proper to God, I can just see Jesus kind of standing on the side, holding up his hand going, but I am the way. So how can this be a space proper to me when I don't inhabit this place? And this isn't a bashing of the Pope. It's a political position. It holds worldwide importance. Sometimes you have to balance all of these plates at the same time. It's certainly not a bashing of Catholics, but it reflects, I think, a willingness to compromise, to suggest that what is being done is in tune with reality, in tune with religious coexistence. So let's talk about that for a second, religious coexistence. Because in Algiers, where this mosque was, where the Pope went in, since 2006, the government has closed 58 Protestant churches and has left 3 open, including one international church that deprives Protestants of freedom of worship. The 2006 ordinance that allowed the government to close these churches punishes any attempt to evangelize Muslims with 5 years in prison. That hardly sounds like a place that represents a space proper to God. Well, the dust up that everybody remembers is God does not bless any conflict. This came from something the Pope said in response to what was at best a questionable meme that was posted by a president. That is a separate issue altogether, but simply the words, God does not bless any conflict. rebuking those who use divine justification for war and that leaders waging war have hands full of blood. Oh my gosh. Well, there's no just wars. If the people that fought in World War II would probably be surprised to hear that. Even the Civil War, on and on, there are no just wars. Well, what does the Bible say? In Joshua, God commanded the Israelites to destroy not just a few, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. He instructed that there should be conflict. In Samuel, he declares that or commands the destruction of the Amalekites. In Numbers, he describes an attack on the Midianites. And the one is probably the one that we mostly know is obvious is Jericho and Joshua. In Joshua chapter 6, it says this, on the seventh day they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Well, that hardly sounds like conflict that's not endorsed. Sometimes no one's denying the horror of war, the absolute inhumanity of war. War is a declaration of you will kill me or I will kill you. There's no humanity in war. But is it necessary? Well, there's 2 conflicts going on right now of particular interest to this country. One of them is between Israel and its enemies. One of them is between America and Iran. There are some within the church now that are saying, Israel's really the bad guy. This stuff is unprovoked. They're out there doing things that or as the sign said with America, we're waging war on Iran. Stop the war on Iran. So let's look at the 2 perspectives from both the Israeli side and the United States side. The Israelis have provided opportunity for almost 100 years now in various kinds of movements to offer land as a 2-state solution to allow one group to exist with another group. It started as early as 1937. Britain's given up the land. That's another problem, historically ignorant, completely bereft of any context, and so they'll make a statement without knowing what the history actually is. In 1937, Great Britain was disassociating itself from their empire, and they were trying to, the conflict starts, and so they decided, both people claim the land, let's set up a situation where it can be dual ownership, where they can both kind of survive and thrive. The Jews said, okay. The Arabs said, no. In 1947, the UN Resolution 181 sets up a Palestinian and a Jewish state. The Arab League said no. They opposed any division of the land. Well, you know what happened shortly after that? In 1948, Israel was able to declare itself a nation again because after the conflict, they were the ones standing. In 2000, Camp David, Barak, the prime minister of Israel, offered Yasser Arafat 90% of the West Bank, over 90%, in Gaza. And that was rejected without a counteroffer. The president at that time, Bill Clinton, said Yasser Arafat showed up for 14 days, and the only thing he said was no. In 2001, they had further talks, and they were going to try and build on that at Camp David, no agreement. 2008, Israel offered 94% of the West Bank and land swaps. Rejected. In 2020, Trump tried. The Palestinian Authority rejected that plan. It was designed to offer a demilitarized state. And here you see the businessman and investments. They refused to participate. So this is the history of Israel. And oh, by the way, when Israel pulls out of Gaza in 2007 and says, okay, we're not going to run it anymore, that's when Hamas stepped in, took that place over. And I've already spilled the beans to our group, but guess how many rockets from 2007 to 2027 have been launched into Israel? 20,000. Now, this is a country that you could say is under continual, absolute attack. What did we just hear on college campuses about 2 years ago in their uprisings? And we had 20-somethings running around chanting from the river to the sea. They don't know what it means. Tax the tree, tax the flea, tax anybody but me. I mean, it rhymed, it sounded good, and so we'll just say it. But that is a historical call for the elimination of Israel. Some people say, well, but Israel is the trespasser on that land. And besides getting into the biblical declaration in Genesis 17 that says this land will be yours, this land is given to your descendants. And that's about 1300 or so BC. Besides that, the Palestinians were actually created, if you will. They were called the Palestinians by the Romans sort of as an insult, 300 odd years after the time of Christ. So you've got this thing where multiple attempts have been made at the two-state solution. They failed. They've been bombed or missiled for 20 years. And then we had October 7th. Now, if you're going, and this is where, if you're theologically about that deep, then you stand in front of a mosque and say, this is a place that God can occupy. If you're theologically that deep, then you say, well, October the 7th was provoked by Israel. But was it? 1,200 people at least were killed, including children and foreign nationals. They were civilians. Out of those, about 900 were civilians. They were murdered. And there were about another 500, 600, 900 military as well. All told, 1,200 people, maybe a little more. So this was an eyewitness account, or actually, this is a fellow who is from the American Jewish Committee, and he works in Europe. He's trying to establish Jewish relations between Germany and Israel. Now, we should be able to recall from our history that there's a pretty good reason to stop anti-Semitism in Germany. He visited Israel with a delegation about a few days after October 7th and did an interview with one of the radio networks that they have there. And so this is the interview. His name is Lemus. Mr. Lemus, you spent several days with a delegation in Israel. What did you experience there? It began with the people who picked us up at the airport. Everyone in Israel knows people, at least indirectly, who have been kidnapped, murdered, or injured. The whole country is traumatized. We saw burnt-out houses in kibbutzim, villages, bullet holes everywhere. Only when you go in there can you begin to imagine the absolute horror that took place on October the 7th. Can you describe in more detail what you saw? Doors were riddled with bullet holes everywhere. In the rooms behind them, people who were hiding were murdered. Even weeks later, the stench in these houses is almost unbearable. You can see how systematically the terrorists went from house to house and killed or kidnapped everyone. In one house, there were children's puzzles on the floor, and in another room, everything was covered in blood. This scene was surreal. How did Hamas proceed there? Documents have been recovered from dead Hamas fighters which show that they had a great deal of information. Listen to this. They knew who lived in which house, how many people were there, how many pets. It was all broken down in detail and planned far in advance. This was premeditated murder. You also visited a military base in Israel where bodies are identified. What are the difficulties involved? So far, 300 people, mainly women and girls, have not been identified. Their condition makes it impossible. They were so badly mangled after they were murdered that they cannot be identified. To this day, body parts are still being found in the areas that were attacked. A few days before we visited one kibbutz, a baby was found in an oven there, been burned to death. These stories are truly unfathomable. How do you process these terrible impressions from your time there? To be honest, I haven't found a way yet. I feel like I don't have the language to put it into words. I've been working in this field for some years now and have experienced a few conflicts. But this surpasses everything. You cannot prepare for this. Of course, I read a lot of reports and saw a lot of pictures before the trip, but being there myself was a completely different experience. Israel has a long history of conflicts, crises, and war, but the Hamas attack was more deadly and violent than ever before. How has this affected Israeli society? Personally, I've always resisted drawing parallels with the Holocaust, but almost every Israeli we have spoken to has drawn a comparison. That makes it clear what we're talking about here. People no longer feel they are safe in Israel and question whether they should leave the country, but they don't know where to go because they don't feel safe anywhere. They just had a bomb threat at a Jewish synagogue that I've attended, by the way. Invited to go to a bar mitzvah and invited to go to a bat mitzvah. Nobody tried to kill me. Nobody tried to eat me. Greeted very warmly, treated very respectfully, because within this group, there's still something that survives, regardless of the religious differences, and they're called the Judeo-Christian values. And they, although would not share my beliefs about Christianity, would share my core beliefs about the sanctity of life. You know, we're talking about, oh, that's horrible, that's incomprehensible. How can you have a place where they're putting together body parts? That's called an abortion mill, where they separate the arms and the legs from the baby, and then just to make sure that things are done well, you crush the head with some kind of device while you're disposing of the fetus. Well, it's only a clump of cells and it can only live. I mean, it's not born yet. What's the earliest surviving baby? 21 weeks, 0 days. 21 weeks it survived. Spent 180 days in intensive care. Just got out. 21 weeks, 0 days. For the math challenge, that's 5 months. So this notion of, well, I like what the Pope has said because the Pope makes this kumbaya between all religions, and it kind of bashes sort of on the Christian religion because, this is an unjust war, and the only way that we can have, and so what you do is you get this cabal of people who have these strange, disconnected views, but yet they'll come together because what it really attacks is Judeo-Christian values, the core of our existence, the core that makes that separates our civilization from other civilizations. What do I mean by that? Well, this is a place where you have to have some discernment. You have to have some maturity, because if you just go all down this road without blinders and just say, yeah, they are justified. Don't forget that Israel is about to host the largest gay pride, gay pride event in their history. Literally hundreds of thousands of people. It's a secular country. But it's a secular country that's, for much of its history, it was secular. If you look at the judges, and you look at the history in Kings, and you look at the judges, 19 of them were knotheads. There were only a couple that were like what you could call good leaders. They were all from straying. But the covenant with Israel, the covenant about that land said, this is who I'm giving this land to. And then in Romans 10, it says the promises and the callings of God are irrevocable. They will not be taken back. We should take great comfort in that, because when you look at all of the things that Israel has done wrong, Paul still says the Gentiles will be grafted into this tree, which means that the Jewish roots are what has established the Gentile church. It doesn't mean that we can neglect the differences in Judaism and Christianity, because they are severe. But I could not stand in front of that synagogue and I could say we share the same Judeo-Christian values, but what I couldn't say, what I wouldn't say, is we worship the same God. Because they would say, my God isn't a God at all. And that's where our common ground would become separate ground. But back to the Judeo-Christian values. Yes, Israel has been a secular. Yes, Israel is strayed. Yes, Israel is not what it's going to be. At some point, Jeremiah, and we're going to talk about this in later topics, but Jeremiah talks about that there's going to be a new covenant established with Judea, where their sins are not remembered anymore. Zechariah 12 says that they're going to realize their mistake and mourn the one they have pierced. So they've strayed. That goes without saying. No arguments. But that's used as justification for kind of, by some even within the church, of saying, well, this means that whatever our abandonment of them is now justified. So let's talk about one of the big things that happens in war, civilian casualties. Have there been civilian casualties in Gaza post-October 7th where Israeli forces have killed Gaza's citizens? Yes. But there's also documented reports of Hamas hiding weapons, stockpiles, and operating in civilian areas. Post-October 7th, announcements were made. Get out of these areas. You are going to be in imminent danger if you remain there. Why would you remain in a place when you know what's coming? Because Hamas is sitting there saying, if you try to leave, we'll kill you. This is the difference between Judeo-Christian values and life is meaningless. So yeah, we put weapons supplies under schools. We build tunnels under hospitals. Aiden was talking about his time when he was in the Middle East, and he could sit on a rooftop as part of the expeditionary force from the United Nations trying to put Lebanon, because Lebanon and Syria it was a horrible mess. And he could sit there, and there were people just would basically just come out of a garage and shoot rocket-propelled grenades across the city. This is what was going on, and that was what was going on to some extent within the Gaza Strip. Here's another question. Why couldn't the people from Gaza just simply go to Egypt? It's right next door. Egypt won't take them. They said, no immigrants from Gaza. Why, you say? Well, because we're worried about if that crew comes in, it could radicalize our people, because it's just not that simple, is it? So a terrorist organization uses civilian infrastructure for military cover, fires rockets into populated zones without constraint. Don't worry where, just fire it. And places command centers near protected areas. And then Israel responds and people go, well, no, that's unjustified. So does Israel have a compelling interest in this? Do they have a dog in the hunt? That's a yes. But then the rest of the story is yeah, but you see, America's been duped. We've been fooled by Israel of fighting their war for them. So we've talked about Israel. Let's talk about America. What's happened with America and Iran since 1979? Well, first of all, there was a hostage crisis. 444 days, 66 Americans turned loose on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. In the 1980s, there were Beirut bombings. Hezbollah carried out suicide bombs in Lebanon, killing 63 U.S. Embassy in 83 and 241 military personnel at the Marine compound in 1983. Kidnappings, hijackings. Throughout the 80s, Iran-backed groups kidnapped Americans in Beirut, including CIA Station Chief William Buckley. And, if you remember this, hijacked TWA Flight 847. Flew that sucker all over the place, demanding this guy and that guy finally be released. What they did was they killed one American, threw him out on the tarmac. They said all of these people are going to be taken to justice. I don't think that ever actually happened. Khobar Tower bombing in 96, Iran-backed terrorists killed 19 American airmen at the Khobar Towers housing complex in Saudi Arabia. From 2003 to 2011, Iran-backed Shiite militias used advanced weapons supplied by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard to kill hundreds of U.S. troops. And since the 2020s, Tehran continues to support groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, a targeted U.S. interest. And so this is what was going on for 47 years. Now, interestingly, in 2007, there was the Iran nuclear deal. And this is what we did. We said, we're going to make a deal with you. You're going to put your 2015. I'm not sure if I said 2007. 2015. You're going to agree to put your nuclear enrichment on pause for 10 years. That would be 2025. In exchange for that, we will give you the sanction relief, and that's when the billions of dollars showed up on pallets on the runway. What happened in 2025? Well, we got to the point where we said we need to have a real meeting because you could read the tea leaves. I mean, when a carrier group shows up, you need to pay attention. When two carrier groups show up, you need to take cover. And they were there. And so the American envoys speak with the Iranian envoys, and they go, this is unacceptable. All of this history, 79 to 26, 47 years of violence has not stopped. In fact, it just keeps going. Oh, by the way, you were supposed to stop your enrichment program in 2015. But what you have actually done is you've built enrichment facilities under mountains. And now you've got, which the Iranians agreed, we have enough nuclear material to make 11 bombs. And we have the sovereign right to do so. Now I'm thinking at this point of the man holding up the sign that says, stop the war on Iran. And what are your critical thinking skills at this point? What do they lead you to conclude? Because in those 10 years where they promised we will delay we won't do nuclear, what did they do? The exact precise thing they said. The technical term for it is they lied. Oh, by the way, they also put out an assassination effort to assassinate U.S. officials, including, not ironically, the president. The question is, did America have a compelling interest? Could America be considered to be engaged in a just war? Does America have blood on its hands? As Christians, the first thing we always seek is peace, but we do not seek peace through appeasement. If you look at the history of the martyrdom of early Christianity, it was because I refused to bend the knee. It was not about politics. It was about beliefs, theological beliefs. But at some point, theology and politics are going to mesh. This is another reason why I find it strange that you would talk about blood on the hands, but not reference abortion. Would Iran have used a nuke? Thankfully, we'll never get to answer that question if God be willing. I think it was a little bit surprising, though, when they went in there and they found out, oh, their missile capability is not quite as poor as we thought it was. They can actually bomb European cities. All they would need would be a warhead to do it. The reason for America's involvement in Iran stands separate than the reason for the Israeli involvement. But they are synergistic. They do provide, similar to, they have shared values, if I could say that. People say, why are they bombing Lebanon now? Why are they bombing? Because what was in Lebanon? Hezbollah. The people that had been sending 20,000 rockets at them for 20 years, 1,000 a year. And they said, it's time to finish it. These people call us the great Satan. And Israel, the little Satan. So yeah, I think they would have probably used a nuke. I think it is reasonable to be concerned that anybody that would go to the trouble of building centrifuges under mountains wasn't doing that for industrial use. They were not producing power, electric power. The Pope, with all due respect, is wrong. He's naively wrong. And I'm just a little peon country preacher in Walker, but I'm obligated to say that. He's wrong. He's wrong in his approach to Islam. It can be with respect, but it can't be with the deference that leads to the conclusion that somehow all religions just mush together into a gumbo that we can all eat. Because I can assure you, the Muslim will not partake of that gumbo. And I respect them for that. They have their beliefs, and you're not, and that's not going to be something open to discussion. The anti-Israel crowd, they're wrong. Not because Israel is perfect, far from it. Not because America is perfect. Far from it. But it's because of the fact that and if we allow the church to become a smaller and smaller influence, then the Judeo-Christian values that built this civilization will become less and less apparent. I could go even further. 30,000 Christians have been slaughtered in Nigeria in the past 14 years. Where's the statement about that? Where's the outrage of 20,000 missiles that are launched into Israel by those who claim Israel is a problem? Where is the outrage? Now, this is where it gets politics and theology just become, I don't know. Yes, the more that I began to draw a conclusion, because I didn't think about this very much, to be honest, until recently when it had to be thought of. And so I said, well, I need, before I shoot my mouth off, I need to make sure that there's a little bit of truth. And so I started thinking, because this typically, it works in themes. Themes are imparted. Creation was made right. Creation was corrupted by man. Genesis, Revelation, the new creation and the new earth, the new heaven and the new earth restores creation. So creation itself goes, God will say, this is what I made, this is what I'll restore. God made a covenant with Israel about the land. He said, this is your land. And for 1,900 years or so, somewhere in there, they had no land. But during that time, how in the world did they keep their language? That is, if you're looking for a documentable miracle, that's it right there. Dispersed throughout the world. Subjected to some of the worst kind of being treated as second-class citizens. They couldn't even go to universities up until a short time ago. In Europe, they were banned from universities. They make up, I think it's 0.2% of the world's population, if I remember right. But they have 22% of the world's Nobel Prize winners. They've been discriminated against. They've been slaughtered. But the land that they were promised, that was taken, and they were dispersed. They're back in the land. That's been made just like the creation was restored, the land was restored. Now there's this business of the separation of Israel. And Jeremiah, you read where it was restored. Paul talks about where we're going to be grafted in. We're all going to be one collective. I believe that basically what's coming out of that, because we've had this conversation before, I believe Revelation is not pointing to a disaster. I believe Revelation is pointing to a victory. When Christ returns, one interpretation of Revelation has it that he will be returning to a world that has essentially turned to him. It will be as a reigning king, not so much as a judgment. Really smart people disagree on that, both pro and con. I'm not willing to die on that hill. I know in the end the good guys win. That's what I know. But I do know that I don't believe that fixing creation, fixing the land, I don't think that Israel's going to be left out of being fixed. I think that's going to be restored just as well. The question is now, what do we do today, right now? Watching Jewish synagogues get closed down, watching people get shot in the mall, watching a guy try to bull rush a dinner with ammunition to apparently take out as many high-ranking officials as he could. We'll ultimately get a better feel for that as the days go on. Said another way, what do we do when we watch the core Judeo-Christian values being mangled regularly in front of our eyes? And the first thing some people will say, and please don't take this wrong, say, well, we need to pray. Yep. But I'm reminded as well by that famous theologian Otis Redding, who in a song, Shout Bama Lama, said, preacher and a deacon out walking one day, out come a bear along the way. Preacher told the deacon to say a prayer. Said, ain't no prayer going to kill that bear. We got to run for it. The notion that you can somehow sit on your keister and simply pray, I think, is a little bit simplistic. Ain't no prayer going to kill that bear. We got to run for it. It's time for the church to challenge people to think critically about matters of critical importance. If you're watching this, if you see this, April the 30th, a movie's coming out called The Theory of Everything. It's got spotty places, but it's going to be April the 30th. It's going to be in Denham Springs. This will be the first thing about critical thinking, about the notion that there is a God, about all of this stuff needs to be taken seriously. I would highly encourage anybody and everybody to take some time to see it. And I'd also encourage everybody to take some time to get historically informed. Read about the history of Israel. From 1937 on. Read about how they became a state in 48. Don't take somebody else's word for it. They got podcasters now that go out and say, it was actually a Jewish conspiracy to kill Charlie Kirk. I know it. I've got all the receipts. I haven't shown them yet. I'm going to eventually show them, but I've got them. Trust me, I've got them. They're there. They're there. What do you mean they're not there? Well, they had the population on the campus of Utah State. I think it was something like about 8% of them are Jewish. You think maybe You've got podcasters now saying that, it's justified for it to be blood on the streets. This is being perpetuated and perpetrated into minds that simply suck this stuff up and don't ask themselves, what am I really thinking? It is the church's challenge. The church's challenge, number one, is to spread the gospel, but it is to establish a baseline of critical thinking, which means you are informed, not just merely a passive participant in the conversation, but can speak somewhat intelligently to the matters at hand. So truth can be parsed from propaganda. And recognize that in the real world, real problems are not black and white. They're complicated. They are nuanced. When you solve one problem, you may very well create another problem. And they're being solved by people that are less than perfect. But they're being solved, hopefully, by people who have some dependence upon God to lead them where they need to be. Because you want to lose Judeo-Christian values, put people in leadership who believe that they have no moral, ethical, legal, or theological responsibility to answer to a higher power. Now, that's when you're going to see core values sliced and diced. So the moral of that story is we are challenged. We are challenged to sort of start separating some of this stuff. But it's horrible, but I don't think it's altogether ironic that while playing with this message, trying to figure out where is it coming from, we get last night. It's like, oh, Lord, help us all. This country right now seriously needs the church. It needs the church so it can turn, but it also needs the church to keep that core Judeo-Christian values that has made America America. If you're watching online and you want to help a little bit, you can certainly contribute. You can go online, Church at Addis, and look for Living Waters Church there for a contribution, or write a check, whatever. Send an email. But we're going to be engaging the fight with all our little bitty hands and resources can muster. And we would certainly welcome anybody that wants to be part of that. So, Father, if we are in the midst of confusion, we look to you, who is the author of peace. If we're in the midst of violence, we look to you, who is the author of structure. But we realize that your son was exposed to the worst kind of inhumanity. But that inhumanity brought about the opportunity for justice. In some small way, may we also be on that side of eradicating justice or injustice, establishing justice. Governments that try to harm, governments that indiscriminately kill thousands of their people because they just simply had the wrong opinion. Governments that hide that pay organizations that hide their weapons under hospitals. Governments that fund organizations that plan well in advance to where they even know how many pets you have before they invade. Governments that fund organizations that indiscriminately machine gun houses, killing children, women, men, doesn't matter. Women raped, children murdered. May this country have the wisdom to recognize what is right and what is wrong, and the courage to stand where right is obviously at. Because if we can't do that, we don't need to talk about Judeo-Christian values unless it's in the past tense. God, forgive us for the brutal inhumanity of murdering our own. Whatever judgment is upon us, it's without your mercy, it would just be Sodom and Gomorrah. We thank you that your hand is withheld. We pledge ourselves to working against such forces. For the people that keep trying to change our values, may we have the courage to stand with them where we can agree, but to make it clear where we cannot agree. And may we hold those values that are not Judeo-Christian, they are Christian. May we hold the Christian values as sacred. There's one God. He is in three persons. His Son came to die for us, and he rose again on the third day. That's not open to debate. May we be brave enough to make sure that it's not debatable. It's in your Son's name we prayed, and everyone said, Amen. Yeah.